Welcome to the Orange and Water Sewer Authority Board of Directors work session this Thursday, July the 11th, 2019. Note that Ruchir Vora will be absent tonight. We want to welcome the new board member, Bruce Runberg, Chapel Hill appointee. To the Board of Directors, Bruce took his oath of office on Monday, July the 8th. And on June 21st, John Morris, Yinka Iancolya, Bruce Boehm, Jody Eimers, Bob Epting, Ed Kerwin, and I had a productive new board member orientation meeting with John Cooley and Bruce Runberg. Does any board member know of a conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest with respect to any item on the agenda tonight? Bob?
Yeah, I would like to inform the board on item number 9 when we discuss the selection of a new director. I'm under contract with Developmental Associates, a recruitment and assessment company, but I do contract work for them from time to time. And so I just want to let the board understand that. And anytime we get comparing, if we go the consultant route, compare things, I will step back from that discussion and not be involved in that decision. So just keep it up front. I counseled with our attorney on this matter.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. On June 18th, 2019, the Carrboro Board of Aldermen reappointed Yinka Iancolya for a 3-year term. Congratulations, Yinka. Earlier this week, I emailed the board an updated list of the standing committees of the Board of Directors, and they are as follows. Community Engagement, Yinka Iancolya, Chair, John Cooley, Jody Eimers, and John Morris. On the Finance Committee, Bruce Boehm, Chair, John Cooley, Bob Morgan, and Bruce Runberg. On the Human Resources Committee, Bob Morgan is Chair, Ruchir Vora, Yinka Iancolya, and Bruce Runberg. On the Natural Resources and Technical Services Committee, Jody Eimers is Chair, Ruchir Vora, Bruce Boehm, and John Morris. Any other board members have an announcement? Announcements by staff. I understand Mary Tiger has an announcement. Introduction. Oh, excuse me, Mary.
I have a little trouble hearing. The ventilation fan seems to interfere with my hearing aids. So if people would speak close to the mic, it will really help me. You know, if you speak about 3 or 4 inches from the mic, it really does. It will help me, and I'll appreciate it so I can stay engaged. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Tiger, please.
Good evening. I'm Mary Tiger, Sustainability Manager, and it's my pleasure to introduce the OWASA board tonight to Keandra Jenkins. Keandra is a fellow with the UNC Environmental Finance Center Leaders in Environment and Finance, affectionately known as a LEAF Fellow. So she is interning with us this summer, and her work this summer is looking at how utilities can leverage their investment in AMI to address other issues and opportunities that utilities might face in operations, in financial planning, in long-term planning, in maintenance, and in customer outreach. So she's doing some research for us on that, as well as incorporating Agua Vista into our affordability outreach program. So we're really happy to have her here. She's going to be with us through the beginning of August, and then she'll go back to UNC to finish her degree in environmental studies, and she'll take her applied work with us and turn it into research with the Environmental Finance Center. So I'll let Keandra say a few things.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here tonight. And I just wanted to stress the point that I've had a really great experience here so far. Mary has done a great job of making sure that I truly understand the inner workings of OWASA and just all the many moving parts that go on to make sure that we have such an important resource. And I really think that it would be really beneficial for more people my age to know what's going on here, because I really don't think that we have an appreciation for the work that you all do. I think when I say OWASA, most of my friends have no idea what I'm talking about. And so So I just think that this is an experience that so many other people would benefit from having, and I'm just lucky that I've been able to have it. So thank you.
Thank you, Keandra. That's quite a challenge you have, and it's going to keep you busy. I was surprised when she said just the 1st of August, because that's something that could go on for a couple of years. Well, if I or any other member of the board can help you, just feel free to contact us, and we'll see what we can do.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. Are there any additional comments, suggestions, and information items by board members? So we'll now move to the consent agenda. There are 5 items on the consent agenda, 1 for information and report, and 4 action items. The first one is quarterly report on attendance at board and committee meetings. The second is award the construction contract for the Kensington Drive, Barclay Road Water Main Replacement Project. The third is the minutes of the May 9th, 2019 meeting of the Board of Directors. The fourth is the minutes of the May 23rd, 2019 public hearings and meeting of the Board of Directors. And the fifth is the minutes of the June 13, 2019 closed session of the Board of Directors to discuss a personnel matter. Are there any public comments on the consent agenda? Would any board member like to pull an item from the consent agenda? So is there a motion, second, and vote to, is there a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda?
Second.
Bob Morgan made the motion and Yinka seconded. So all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. So now we're moving to the regular agenda. And just a reminder that public speakers are encouraged to organize their remarks for delivery within the 4-minute time frame allowed each speaker unless otherwise determined by the Board of Directors. Secretary Bruce Boehm will be our timekeeper tonight. So Ruth, you're going to lead us, kick it off here.
All right. Thanks,
Okay.
Ray. Yeah, I'm Ruth Rouse, the Planning and Development Manager for OWASA. So tonight I'm going to give you, actually, before I get to the regular part of the agenda, I recognize that we have a couple new board members here, so we're going to go through just some Forest Management 101 and why we have this land and why we want to manage it. Then I'm going to turn it over to Linda Lowe, our communications, I can never remember her official title. She's going to talk about the community meeting that we had on June 20th. And then the other piece that we want from you all this evening is staff has proposed a schedule of activities moving forward, and we want your guidance on that. All right, so OWASA has about 2,400 acres of forest land, and much of that is in the Cane Creek watershed. You can see all the green area inside the blue line outlines the Cane Creek watershed in that map. So that means any rain that falls inside that blue line will eventually make it down to Cane Creek Reservoir. So most of that land was purchased to help protect the water quality in Cane Creek. And then another big chunk of it is in that brown shaded land just outside of that watershed area, and that was purchased for biosolids application. About 150 acres of that has been cleared for biosolids, but there's still about 500 acres of uncleared land that is still in trees. And we also own about 120 acres down in Chatham County on the west side of Jordan Lake that is also forested, and that was purchased for a potential water treatment plant intake on the west side of Jordan Lake should we need it in the future. So we want to manage our land because while we have all this land, a lot of it, some of it is in pretty good shape, but others is not in very good shape. We have a lot of very closely planted pine stands that allow no sunlight to get to the forest floor. That can stress that creates zero habitat. Also, the trees don't grow in that environment and they can get stressed and makes them susceptible to disease. So that's one example of something that we would want to manage. We recognize that we are not experts in forest management, and so we have rounded up the people who are to come help advise us and work with us through this process. We are proposing, when I say new, back in 2010, we came up with a plan for all the acreage at once. What we're proposing to do now is to prioritize our land for management based on some guiding principles that I'll go over in a minute, a prioritization process, and we'll choose the 2 or 3 highest priority sites. We will then develop management plans with those and engage with the neighbors of those where we can actually walk the site with them and show them what we plan to do and get their feedback on it. After we implement it, we also want to evaluate and want to apply any lessons learned and choose the next set of sites that we would work with. So that's more of an adaptive management type approach. So we're learning as we go along. So we had 6 guiding principles that we've developed. These are pretty high level. Know that we did hear some feedback on these at the community meeting. I think Linda will go through some of that with you. I'm not going to read all these. I feel like you can all read these yourselves. So. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Linda.
So, hello, Linda Lowe, Communications and Engagement. And yeah, I'm here just to give a little bit of a snapshot into what happened at the community meeting on June 20 in Cane Creek. And I'm guessing that actually some of the community members that participated in this meeting are here today. So I feel a bit awkward with my back to you. Sorry about that. Just the way the room is positioned. But essentially, it was really important for us to come back to the community and join in a meeting together in a much more collaborative way than I understand was perhaps rolled out back in 2010. So we sent out an invitation via email, letter, etc., to the individuals that we had contact information for. And we had about 45 people attend from the community. And of course, the third-party land management experts that Ruth mentioned, some staff and some board members here participated as well. And is the hearing okay? Oh, okay, yes. I'm trying to be really loud. So, and the process that we introduced was focused with our priority on listening to what the community had to say and getting their feedback on our draft guiding principles and the new process and the new plan that we wanted to put forward, which Ruth mentioned, which was much more incremental. And so we started the meeting with Ed, as you see in the middle, giving a short presentation, and then really yielding to the community so they could speak and have their say. And we really intentionally designed the process such that it was focused purely on listening, and we did that by breaking out into small groups, 10 people per group, approximately 6 groups, with a facilitator, and I was one of the facilitators. And the facilitators asked the same questions across each group. It ranged from things like, what are your views on these draft guiding principles, thoughts, feedback, concerns, comments, how can OWASA be a good neighbor to you, and these such things. And then either the facilitator or a scribe with the facilitator documented every single piece of feedback that was given as we went around in a circle. And again, in a circle to ensure that every single individual had the opportunity to share their feedback if they wanted to ensure that no single voice dominated the conversation. And when we finished these breakout sessions, we reconvened as a large group again. And so that bottom photo shows physically how the room was laid out when we reconvened. We really tried to create a larger circle, again, sort of more equal space, if you will, rather than maybe how I am right now, standing in front of you at a podium. And we invited a volunteer from each group to report back to the larger group what was said, what was heard, what was expressed, to ensure complete transparency so that every individual in the room had line of sight to what every other group had expressed. Again, this is our commitment to wanting to be more collaborative, wanting to be transparent in the entire process. And so you see here aside from the image with Ed, all of the other images are members of the community who volunteered to report back on what their groups talked about. So this was really a collaborative process. The feedback was really robust, really substantive, and we heard very honest feedback, which is what we wanted in terms of the principles and the new approach. And some of the feedback we've summarized here. I know in your agenda packet, you received a written summary, sort of a 2-pager, and in addition, a scan of all of the poster notes that were written on. And so this is our sort of highlights, if you will, of the feedback that we received from the community. Generally a comfort level from the community with the guiding principles. Really heard loud and clear and really respect the fact that there's a desire from the community for continued engagement. Really heard, that the community plays a role in protecting the water, and I understand, we understand it's important to recognize that and do that in partnership together. A desire from the community to see a holistic approach to the land management, and also appreciation for how we're working in partnership with others, the community, but also these other land management experts. And I keep saying the word transparency because, as per the second last bullet, that was also communicated very clearly to us, this desire to have continued transparency. And at the end of the process that evening, we felt that we had a really collaborative, not from a place of conflict, but a conversation from a place of collaboration. And I welcome, I know there are individuals here from the community that can maybe express their own views. That's the view from Linda. We also, in the spirit of wanting to continue this conversation, as Ruth mentioned, are organizing a tour of our mitigation track that we've been managing to walk the lands together and share some of the practices we've been using, learn from the local community members themselves, from their insights, because they know the land so well, they live there. So this is part of an ongoing process, and hopefully a new approach and a new partnership with the community. So, thanks, Ruth.
All right, so what does staff propose that we do going forward? And I want to point out that to those of you that have been on the board, that this does look a little bit different than what we had proposed to you earlier. So the first difference is the August 22nd board meeting. And this really does feed from what we heard at that community meeting, was that we like your new approach, addressing a few tracks at a time. However, we also think you need to look at it holistically. And people specifically asked, what is your vision for OWASA's forest management program? And then, as Linda pointed out too, we have, there are a couple guiding principles that we heard that we may want to bring into those guiding principles. And then also, because they were so broad, folks were asking, what do those guiding principles mean to OWASA? Because they're going to mean different things to different people. So we envision bringing back a short paper to you all that has a vision statement in it, as well as here are the revised guiding principles, and here's how staff is interpreting them, to hear your feedback on those. And then in September, we're planning to bring back a draft process on how we would prioritize those lands for management. I think in the past we may have said we're going to bring back, here's our top priorities. We really think, in the spirit of transparency, we want to make sure that you all and the public have an opportunity to comment on the actual process to prioritize those lands. And then once you all bless it, so I want to point out too that all dates are tentative, so there's no driving regulation here. There's no statutory requirement that we've got to do this by a certain date. So anytime that you all feel like we need to slow down, we can slow down. So these dates are all built on one another. So if one part slows down, then the rest of them would also slide. But then we're proposing that staff would select their 2 to 3 priority sites for management. And again, we'd include our partner agencies in selecting that based on that prioritization method. And this also is a little bit different from what we had proposed to you in the past, and that we thought that we would actually bring you all, here's our top list, and work with you to kind of select the top 2 or 3 sites. But we feel like this is the way we would manage our CIP projects, that we're going through our prioritization process, and then you all see it in your annual budget review of what's going to be coming up next. And then once that is completed, then we would begin developing those forest management plans. And again, then there'd be a community engagement plan developed for each of those individual forest management plans. All right, so what do we need from you tonight? Want you to hear and consider any of the comments that the public makes this evening. Want to hear your discussion of the information that was in the package, as well as what you hear from the public this evening. You do not need to take any formal resolution. However, we would like you, your feedback on the next steps to be made through a motion. And there is draft motion language in your agenda packet for you all. And that is the end of my presentation. I'll turn it back over to you, Ray.
Thank you, Ruth, and thank you, Linda. It's time for public comment, but first I'd like to, before I invite the people who have signed up to speak to the podium, I want to mention that 4 comments were received and provided to the board via email. Brenda McCall on 6/23/2019 and 7/11/2019. Cheryl Junk on 7/10/2019. And then Jill and Connor Blakeney on 7/11/2019. And those copies of those emails are in front of each board member. We have them tonight. So now we have 3 people that have signed up to speak. And invite first Brenda McCall and then Carl Hoffman.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having the meeting tonight and for the meeting last month. We really appreciate it. And I'm just going to read the letter into the minutes, and so that everyone here can know what we have come up with. This letter was conceived and worked on by several of us, and then signed by the 28 or 30 people who are on the letter, and there'll probably be more coming in. So, dear OWASA board members, thank you and OWASA senior staff for a well-planned community meeting on the new forestry plan. We are encouraged by your idea to pursue the project in small segments, engage the community in an effective manner, and assure water quality as a priority. Your new approach offers a sharp contrast to the commercial forestry plan that you were considering in 2010. As you move the project forward, we ask that you adopt the following principles, which reflect many of the citizen comments and which supplement the guiding principles that you presented last month. These principles will clarify that your new plan is environmentally sound and supports your water quality mission. The principles are, number 1, to define specific forestry actions that will distinguish this project from commercial forestry. That could include plans to selectively thin damaged areas, restore native species, and protect the existing tree canopy. You might even seek to expand the forest surrounding the reservoir. Thinning should protect a diverse range of species found in native Piedmont forest. The commercial value of the timber is not expected to be relevant. Number 2, to establish specific measurements and targets to monitor water quality throughout the process. Ideally, OWASA should strive to improve water quality during and after this, which I'm sure you do. Number 3, add water quality experts to the advisory board. This should include representatives from the Clean Water Management Trust Fund, since they hold easements on much of your land. It should also include an independent water quality expert, possibly from Duke's Nicholas School of UNC's Institute for the Environment. Number 4, work with the community to establish a neighborhood council open to anyone with land adjacent to reservoir land. This council could work actively with members of your board and senior staff to keep everyone appraised of progress and issues and would have input as the plan moves forward. Thank you for considering our views. Hopefully, you will agree that they reflect citizen comment, reduce project risk, and help manage water quality. If you want to, at any time in the future, please contact me. My information's on here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. McCall. Carl Hoffman, and then Lester Ray.
Thank you very much for the meeting we had out at Mapleview Farms and the ice cream. I appreciate it. But I appreciate the openness, and I think that there was a lot of learning that went on there. And I do understand that you were listening and that we had a chance to voice our concerns. So thank you very much for that. I'm bothered a little bit by an approach of we'll learn as we go along. I'm not sure as a professional and working with clients that if I walked into a meeting trying to sell something and I said, we'll figure it out as we go, that it would be widely accepted by my clients. I think that you should come prepared to those meetings with an idea of what's going to happen and how. So I made a list, like, is the project to harvest? Is the project to thin? Are you dealing with diseased trees? Are you creating open spaces? Are you redefining how the forest should be done? Now, much of what Brenda said is contained within this. I'm just dumbing it down a bit for my part. But I think it's also, what do you need to do to accomplish that? What equipment's going to be brought in? How much noise are you going to make? Is there going to be erosion involved? After it's cleared, how fast is the forest going to be replanted? How? What impact will it have on that land? And what do you expect from us as neighbors? To get to some of your plots, you're going to have to cross property to thin. How are you going to do that? How are you going to estimate the cost of crossing that land? How are you going to factor in what gets restored? The cost of that when it gets restored? Then what impact long term? I mentioned erosion. But what impact will it have on wildlife? A lot of us have really nice views and we like the forest out there. What are the short-term and long-term impact on the quality of our life by how that view may change and our surroundings may differ? Water quality clearly has got to be factored in, so I understand that. And I think there's short-term and lasting effects that need to be defined. And basically what I'm trying to do is come up with a checklist that should be prepared before you come to deal with any project ahead of time, and not just kind of come in and say, well, we want to cut down some trees. I also think that it would be nice to know on what you might need from surrounding property owners or what impact might have on surrounding property owners that may not appear to be directly affected but are. You know, it's pretty hilly out there, so things roll downhill, and it may appear as if a property isn't directly tangential to what you're doing, but it could be affected by what you are doing. So I'd like to understand that, and you should come prepared for that. Okay. If there are damages done, what's the process? And some of that may be unintended. Trees don't always fall where they're supposed to fall. How are you going to take care of unintended damage? What contingencies do you have involved if something happens that should be taken care of? If there is if you have to restore property, at what cost? What will it take? And what are the implications? And then I think most of all, if I were a property owner next to it, are you adequately funded to do this? You know, it's trust me, we'll take care of it. Or is it, here's how we're going to take care of it, and here's how we're funded? Okay, thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Lester Ray.
My name is Lester Ray. I'm the farmer that grows hay on the fields on the headlands. So I've had dealings with OWASA for quite a while. And I went to the meeting at Mapleview, and I'm here. I liked everything I heard. It sounds like a good way to go about something to get the public input. I'm here representing 4 friends of mine, all experienced draft horsemen, who had the idea that that it would be an ideal way for us to do a benefit for OWASA and ourselves also to do some horse logging on the tracks that are smaller. I understand that the commercial loggers are going to have to be involved in some of the larger tracks and some of the clear cutting and such as that. But we all have experience doing horse logging. Of course, my main job is as a farmer. We all have jobs, but we would like to do some of this also. And if there's some tracks adjacent to other people's property where they don't want heavy equipment, noise, or whatnot, we can do it without a lot of disturbance to the land. All you'll hear is chainsaws. And if I might make a suggestion of a way to try us out, there's quite a few down trees from Hurricane Michael on the property. I'm speaking specifically about the headland because that's what I see. There's I haven't counted them, but there's as many as 3 dozen or more nice sized hardwoods that came down, root ball and all. Some of them are still alive. Most of them have died by now. And if, as a way of proving that we can do what we say we can do, if we were allowed to salvage those trees, and you could see how we do our work, then maybe we could go from there. But we'd like the opportunity if there's some areas where you want to selectively cut and not leave a lot of tracks and ruts and whatnot behind. We can work all through the winter without regardless of the weather. So anyway, I just wanted to make that statement that we're available if you want to consider us.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. So it's time for any questions from any board members about the presentations from Ruth and Linda, or any comments that you may have. John Morris.
When I take a look at the agenda item tonight, I noticed that it's very different from a direction that the board worked out earlier this year. We had some very detailed discussions in January and February this year. And what we basically decided on was to try to get away from discussing abstract principles, which is very hard for people to know what that really means on the ground. And so we wanted to get down to talking about specific sites and what we should do on those specific sites. And so we thought if we did that, it would be the very definition of transparency. People could see exactly what we proposed to do on site A and what problem we were addressing, what actions we would take, and what we would anticipate the benefits to be. And so that would be accompanied by a forest management plan, which would answer many of the questions that Mr. Hoffman raised in terms of all those details about historic sites, water quality protection, access points, and that sort of thing. So, so basically we're talking about taking a step-by-step incremental process, and we would have public input on this process so that the public could look at what we're doing. What we're doing now is somewhat different from that. What the staff is recommending is quite different. I guess what they're recommending for August the 22nd is to devote a meeting to a vision for forest management. The staff says they don't have an idea what that would be at this point. And so I'm a little concerned that we may be wasting our time and the public's time with more abstract discussion that doesn't really address the concerns that people who live out there have. It doesn't show what we're actually planning to do. So then on September 26th, the staff is recommending that we adopt a prioritization process that would indicate which project should be done in what order. It sounds like a good thing to have, but it may be very complicated in practice. There are probably about 100 different sites out there. And by sites, I mean a piece of land that has fairly uniform conditions that would need to have a plan for it. And so then, you know, we're looking at many years of management, many decades in some cases. And so to get all that prioritized is a very complicated endeavor. And I think it could take really a lot of staff and board resources to do that. I guess what I would suggest instead of that is some things that I think were said at the very successful June 20 meeting that we had out at Cane Creek. There were some people who said we need an overall concept of what we're doing. And but I heard more strong expressions, people saying this: your general principles sound good, we have no objection to that, but what does that mean in practice? What are you actually going to do? There were several people who spoke very forcefully in that direction. And another person said, okay, your principles look good, but I want to know how OWASA's management will affect my property. And some of this is, again, related to the questions Mr. Hoffman asked. So one thing I'm concerned about with the staff approach is that there might be really less transparency and less public input. Their recommendation is that after we develop a vision statement and a prioritization process, I think neither of which may answer some of the questions that our neighbors out there are really concerned about. The staff would then select sites to be managed, and that would be coordinated with the adjacent landowners, but there really would not be much public visibility of that. So I'm comfortable with the staff selecting the priorities, but I think there should be a little bit more public visibility. So I'm basically concerned with two things. I think the vision statement and the prioritization process may bog us down and waste our energy and the public's energy. And I'm afraid it has less transparency. So what I would recommend is that we tackle these two things in parallel. And Ray suggested that I put my ideas on paper, and that's been handed out. So what I would recommend is going back to what the board decided back in early this year, and also the slide that Ruth showed with the next steps. That I think that's what we presented on June 20, and I think that's the way to go. So what I would suggest is that at the September 26th, the August 22nd meeting, the staff would explain the general concepts of forest management and what some of the problems are out there and what needs to be done about them. And then explain this incremental strategy that we're taking small steps, and that for each site to be managed, there will be a forest management plan, and that will be coordinated with people who live nearby the site so they can see exactly what's going. And so that's the time when you would negotiate about things like access points, buffers, any protection of historic sites that people know about. So, and then of course we would receive public comment on that. Then at the September 26th meeting, I would like to see the staff perhaps identify 8 or 10 potential initial sites to be managed. Some of them would be like thinning pine trees. Some would be maybe the issue that Mr. Ray raised with dead timber that's standing and may present a fire danger. So then the staff would then recommend out of that array of options maybe 2 to 4 sites to start out managing. And again, the forest management plan would be developed and there would be coordination with nearby landowners. I think this would be very transparent. And so I think if we do want to do the priority system and the vision, I think we can do that in parallel with these first steps. And I appreciate the comment that we don't want to just go out there and learn by doing. That's not what we're proposing. What we are proposing is that we have a very careful forest management plan. And one example we keep coming back to is thinning pine trees. OWASA planted pine plantations out there. That's something that we did. And now the pines are too thick. They're not growing well. You know, they're going to become more subject to disease, and it's very bad wildlife habitat. So by selective thinning, the trees can be healthier, they can grow better, they can capture more carbon, and we'll have more light hitting the forest floor and better wildlife habitat. I think people living nearby that will really like that. And so that's why I think that, and I think, you know, people who are here are very interested, you know more about it, but I think if we start with a couple of projects like that, the wider community will see what we're doing and get more familiarity with it. And I think we will learn from experience, even though we're not going to start out with just blind experimentation. So anyway, that's what I suggest, and I think we can do the work on a vision and a priority process in parallel with this, because we're talking about years and decades of forest management. You know, this is a very long range commitment. So thanks for listening, and that's my best recommendation.
Well, thank you, John. Other board members? Jody Imers?
Yes. Well, first, thanks to the public for your comments that we received prior to the meeting and for your comments here at the meeting. They've been very helpful. And John, thank you for your very articulate and well-stated plea to speed things up a little bit. And I think this also addresses some of the comments that the public has made for very concrete steps and parameters of the forestry management plan, particularly Carl's request for very concrete plans and contingencies. I'm convinced, John. I think if the staff feels that they can move that quickly, I would be in support of having the board receive at the August 22nd meeting, not only the vision and draft guiding principles, but the sort of a draft a process for forestry management on particular sites. And then to receive at the September 26th board meeting to have specific sites brought up and to begin to discuss those. But I would also point out that we should consider having the Natural Resources and Technical Services Committee meetings prior to these two board meetings to discuss those topics. I think what we affectionately call NERTS, the Natural Resources and Technical Services Committee, can provide a more thoughtful process than we can perhaps for such a complicated topic. So I would request that we consider having NERTS meetings prior to August 22nd and September 26th. And I would also note that the public is welcome to attend the committee meetings, and it's up to the chair somewhat how much the public gets to participate in those. And I can say that as chair, you would have an opportunity to participate. And you can, and I would encourage you to also participate in the August 22nd meeting and the September 26th meeting. So those are great opportunities for interested public come and express their views and their comments on and suggestions for OWASA's deliberative process.
Okay, thank you, Jody. Other board members? Bob,
I
Morgan.
just have one reaction to what Jody just said. And I can be corrected. I may have seen this differently than other folks, but typically at committee meetings, they're open to the public, but we don't take public comment. And then the public comment is made at the larger public meetings so that all the board members can hear those comments. So that's the way we've done them in the past, at least the way I've understood it. So if we're going to do it differently, we want to make it clear to the public and to the board.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. And if, as a new committee chair, I'm doing something incorrectly, I want to learn that right away. We have had some NERTS discussion of forestry management in the past where one meeting, two members of the public were there, one meeting, one member of the public was there. And we did invite their feedback on our deliberations. But if that's, we'll follow the rules on that. But I do stress that the public has an opportunity for making their views known through prior communications before the meetings and at these August 22nd, September 26th meetings. And my view is that that's a more productive means of engaging the public and the neighbors at this scale than it would be with a neighborhood council. That's my view. And I think that's been the view of the board at prior meetings as well, that the public is engaged through our public meetings. I had one other comment, if I can make it now, about including a water quality specialist in our partnership. And actually, I have a few comments related to that. One is that many of our existing partners have, part of forestry management is water quality impacts. And so, and it was even pointed out at the public meeting in June that the Forestry Service, that's one of the services they provide is water quality considerations. What's the impact on water quality? And if we're going to consider doing some water quality sampling, which I think is a good idea, particularly sediment, which is EPA has listed that as a number one priority, number one pollutant problem in this country, and could be an issue with forestry management concerns, that we consider a number of not just this this one thing that was pointed out by the public as having some easements. I mean, that we may want to consider them, but I think we want to be think a little bit harder about what partners we might want to add to the process. And I'd point out Duke might be a good partner. They may want to be paid. The U.S. Geological Survey, an agency that I used to work for, they do water quality monitoring around the Triangle and statewide. We might want to consider them. They would want to be paid. But that's just to throw it out. We should think more in depth about who we engage as a water quality partner per se. So that's my comment.
Bruce Unberg.
As a new member, I suspect I should just listen, but I do have a question, which is to be sure that the board and the staff are aware of the fact that UNC has a forest management plan, very good one for Carolina North, and I know Duke has one as well for their properties. And if we haven't taken a look at those, they're worth looking at, because many of the questions that were raised by Mr. Hoffman, I think it was, would be answered by such a product. And plagiarizing things is not always a problem either. So thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Any other comments from the board? So we need to provide staff some direction. Ed?
Yeah, I'd like to
Please.
offer some comments on the
Ed Kerwin.
suggestions. So
Yeah.
given our resources internal, which has us rely heavily on the expert agencies that have been identified, we will not have a process ready in August. Just simply won't have it, especially if you're having a NERTS committee meeting before the board meeting. That essentially means our process would be done 2 weeks from now to meet that schedule. We simply could not pull that off given our internal resources, again, which rely so heavily on volunteer expert agencies. And whether we're following John's proposed process or staff's proposed process, which I still believe is the best approach, what staff has laid out, we're going to have a process to prioritize the sites in either approach. And that is so critically important. We think we need the time to do that, to do it right. There's no reason to rush into this work. The land has sat there since 2010, and it's 9 more years. This is not the time to try to go fast. This is the time to do it right. And we think doing it right is make sure we have a thoughtful process to prioritize, that we can run that by our agencies, have the value of their input into that, looking at plans like at Carolina North. And then if the NERTS would like to meet before the board, that's fine too. But I think we should have that process to prioritize before this board and before the public, where they have a chance to comment before we start bringing you sites. Because if we bring you sites and you say, well, how did you pick those? And you question, well, why'd you do it that way? Why not something else? I think this process to prioritize is just key to this program's success and key to transparency. So I recommend that we take the time, we follow the staff proposed process, and we move as quick as we can, but we move smartly, openly, transparently. And if the board wants to pick the sites rather than staff, I mean, that's fine with us. But I don't think we can meet, I wouldn't be comfortable that we can meet that at a quality that you would expect us to, or that the community would.
John Morris?
I think the real issue here is, well, we're not starting from zero on forestry knowledge. You know, we have a very good forest consultant, and he has produced a tremendous amount of information for us. And just in talking to staff people about this over the last couple of months, I've been told that he has made lots of progress in coming up with priorities for forest management. So there's a lot of knowledge out there to be tapped. We also have Johnny Riley on the staff, who's the manager out at Cane Creek, who has a background in forestry himself. He's a very knowledgeable guy. So I think the real issue is, you know, what we should not rush is the vision and the prioritization process if we're going to do that. It's going to take a lot of time. But what would not take too much time is to start with some of the low-hanging fruit that's already been identified by our forest consultant, Johnny Riley, and other people. So again, I'm using my thinning of pine trees example. That's a very low impact activity that would have immediate environmental benefits. And so the real issue is, can we start those very modest first steps as the board decided back in January, and you know, get going with that, and then take our time to develop the prioritization system and the vision if we need that. I guess I would kind of reverse the time thing. We've been stuck since 2010 for 9 years. I don't think there's any reason to let more time go by if we have these very obvious beneficial projects that we could start working on.
Bruce Bowen?
But so John, how did you identify the low-hanging fruit? I mean, there must be some some metric or some prioritization that you have in your head, or maybe was provided by somebody else. And so my question then would be, is that model going to be the same as what staff comes up with when they go through the deliberative process that Ruth has outlined? If it's different, then we probably shouldn't do the low-hanging fruit, because we don't have any guarantee that those will be the first parcels that the staff process would come up with. If it's the same, then I would imagine staff would have told us already, hey, we already have a prioritization model that we believe in that works. And so I don't understand really.
Well, forestry is not, forestry is an old profession, and we know a lot about it. You know, people have been practicing it for a long time. There are a lot of established principles. So between our consulting forester and Johnny Riley, who's our staff person out at Cane Creek, I've been told that they made lots of progress in coming up with priorities for us to attend to. And that was, you know, going back for several months when the board decision was that we were headed toward, you know, making these decisions in the next couple of months. And so I think the staff can be easily ready to advise us on that. What would take them more time is to get prepared for developing a vision statement and a very elaborate prioritization process. So I say let's start with the easy, beneficial projects, which our staff is already ready to advise us on, and then take our time with more elaborate policy making, which, you know, can govern the oncoming years of effort. It's kind of like, you know, these projects are not connected to each other hydrologically or electrically. You know, it's not a connected system particularly. If we tackle a few projects that we have evidence will have immediate environmental benefits, you know, that doesn't affect something a mile away on our property. And so there's no reason, to me, there's no reason we shouldn't start with some of these obvious projects. And then when we finish those up, we can pick some more. And by that time, maybe we'll have a better prioritization system.
You may be 100% right. It just bothers me that on the one hand, we're saying we want to go through a deliberate process to figure out what the priorities are. And on the other hand, we're saying, well, we know what the answer is going to be, at least for the first, I don't know, half dozen projects. Let's go ahead and do it. And it just makes me nervous that as someone who's not a forester, who doesn't understand this, trying to reconcile those two things. And also, as if I put my hat on as a member of the public, that does not seem logical and transparent to me to do that. Well, it just sounds like we're sort of putting our hands in both cookie jars, or whatever the right metaphor is to use there.
Well, people have different approaches. We just may see things differently, but I think one way to look at it is that if we ask our staff in August to present to us, you know, a general briefing on this forestry issue, and they can describe some of what they would say is the obvious things that we need to do. So I think we'll learn more about it when they do that. And then at the next meeting in September, I think the staff would say, okay, here are 8 or 10 possibilities we looked at, and here are the 3 or 4 best ones. And they would tell us why they think that. They would say, this is how much you'll increase the health of the forest. This is what it'll do for wildlife habitat. And, you know, it'll be up to the board to see whether we're convinced by that. And so, to me, that's extremely transparent in that what we will hear the rationale for those suggestions. And then following that, the staff will develop a detailed management plan for each site, and that will cover the kind of questions that Mr. Hoffman raised, like what will be the effect on water quality, what's the access point, you know, do we need a buffer, et cetera. And then the staff will meet with the adjacent landowners and go over those same issues with them to make sure that we've done the best we can do to satisfy their needs. So that's the direction that we set back in January. And I think the staff has been, behind the scenes, the wheels have been turning to get ready to help us do that.
Jody Amers?
Yeah, well, first I want to thank you for your very well considered and very well expressed opinions. And, but I have to change my opinion here and support the executive director's desire to have it done a little more slowly and perhaps take these early steps more slowly. And I do that in consideration of his role as manager of all the staff and their efforts to coordinate with partners. I think when you work with volunteer partners, you have to abide by their time frame. So while I really appreciate bringing in those very very concrete steps early on, and I would love to support that. If we had 10 staff, we could, or even 3 staff, we could put full-time on this, and maybe it'd be the way to go. But, we have other considerations, our long-term water supply plan and things that they're working on at the same time. So I'm going to have to change my opinion here and go with the original plan as outlined.
Well, I'd just like to point out that
John,
the time-consuming part, if I could just finish one sentence, is not,
John,
it's not the,
please, let's let Yinka.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Speak, please. Yinka Iankoya?
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, John.
So I know, just in hearing comments, I know that the board itself hasn't had a time to figure out what our principles and guiding vision is yet. I know we've had the staff draft version, and when I'm looking at the schedule on the agenda, it was appearing that on the August 22nd, that's when the board would actually delve into the specifics more of how are we defining principles? What is it that we're attaining and looking for? I feel that if we're moving too fast, the board won't have a chance to do that. Right now, we're still in draft form, and we don't have the benefit of having public feedback within that draft form that we currently have. And in slowing things down a little bit, we'll be able to incorporate the comments that we heard tonight, written comments that we received, and also just allow staff time to get prepared for us to implement what we're going forward with.
John?
I'll be
Morris?
brief. The thing that's burdening the staff is not the recommendation of sites to us for management, because the wheels have been turning on that ever since we started our policy direction back in January. What's burdening the staff is the new things that have just been added. That's the vision statement and the prioritization process. So those new things are what the burden is that Ed is concerned about.
Ed Kerwin?
I'm not concerned about that at all. Our team can put together a vision. Our team can propose revising the guiding principles, especially with the input from our many experts. And I think that's the place the board needs to start. What's the overall thing that the organization wants to accomplish with managing our forests? So I think having that done in a thoughtful way, that the full board has the benefit of hearing again from the public, giving direction from staff. You may decide it takes multiple meetings to do that. But I think setting that overall vision and having the board weigh in on those guiding principles. We don't have 10 sites in our pocket ready to present. We simply do not. So I don't know who's John's been talking to about having a plan ready to go. We do not. We simply do not. We know where we have sites that are heavy pine. We have an idea where they are, but we don't have a thoughtful process to prioritize 2,400 acres to the highest priority. We don't have that. We have a 2010 plan that's just information at this point. That 2010 plan was not done in alignment with the current draft guiding principles. So I mean, I think it's really important in August that you take a look at our vision, you take a look at revised guiding principles, hear again from the public. And concurrent with that, we're going to be working on this process. And in fact, having it ready in September, we think is very ambitious because there's, just limited resources internal. We're going to rely heavily on the experts outside, and they are volunteering a lot of time and effort to this. And, it's just going to take a while to do that, but let's do it right. I think we're going slow to go fast and do it well.
Bob Morgan and then Bruce Runberg.
Thank you. I recall that we just adopted a budget, and one of the things that we came out of that is that we don't have unlimited resources. And so I think it behooves us that we need to establish clear priorities of how we're going to spend money. If we go and spend money on the low-hanging fruit, it may be something that affects a higher priority type of expenditure that gets us to the target that we want to get. So I like the approach of the staff. I'm more comfortable with that approach.
Bruce?
I want to change my comment to a question, which is, has the staff looked at the UNC forest management plan?
We have not.
I would ask that you do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. John Cooley, you've been sitting there patiently taking all this in.
Yes, I have. But yes, as a new member, I do appreciate all the community's comments, and that's ultimately we're here to make sure that we're doing right by the people that we represent. So with that said, I just believe that having a plan that can be executed well in line with the capacity limitations that we have, and being able to best leverage, some of the volunteer asset, and, kind of weighing all those things, make our ultimate decision. I think that's probably the best way to go. And just, it doesn't seem like anything is going to get solved, right here today. So ongoing conversations, seem to be the way to go.
Thank you, John. Any other comments? Jody Imers?
Forgive me for talking so much about this, but there was one other comment I had that was made in the, it's referencing comments that were made in the public meeting and again in the public's comments provided to us, and that was the use of herbicides in a prescribed burn area. And I also have concern about that, and I would like to ask if we could have our forestry management advisor take a look at the use of herbicides and see if we could substitute some other process for use of herbicides.
Okay. There's not a formal resolution. Staff is not asking for a formal resolution, but just a motion of support. Are we ready to? The motion that staff has recommended is the Board of Directors approves the next steps for forest management and authorizes staff to begin implementing the actions outlined in the July 11th agenda package. All in favor? Say aye. All opposed? For the motion. No, the motion wasn't made, was it? Thank you, Bob. That was a test, yeah. So would somebody care to make that motion? Jody Imers, second.
Second.
Yinka Iankoya seconded. Now, can we vote? Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda, item number 7, is the Diversity and Inclusion Program update. And I understand Kelly Satterfield and Kelly Belcher will present on this. Did I do that okay?
Stay on fire, but. We're sorry this TV keeps blinking out. And it's especially Ray and Bruce.
We ready to roll?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Hi, good evening. My name's Kelly Satterfield. I'm the Finance and Procurement Manager here at OWASA, and I'm a member of the Diversity and Inclusion Recruitment Group. Kelly B. and I will be updating you tonight on the activities that our group has been involved in, some improvements that we have made to our process, and kind of give you what our next steps are. I want to start by...
Stay in the mic.
I want to start by introducing our awesome group, Nick Rogers, who's the Assistant Distribution and Collection Manager, Vishnu Gangadaran, who's Engineering Manager over CIP, Denise Battle, who's Customer Service Manager, Monica Dodson, who's Wastewater Treatment and Biosolids Recycling Manager, and Kenneth Laughlin, who's Water Treatment Plant Manager, and Kelly Belcher and myself. We're a representative group of the supervisors and managers here at OWASA. We were selected because we're some of the more active hiring managers here at OWASA. We've been involved in quite a few activities over the past 2 years. This timeline kind of highlights some of them that we've been involved with. To summarize, we've completed training with Visions. We were involved in focus group meetings and an organizational assessment, which informed our recommendations for improvements. And we worked independently as a group to review OWASA's recruitment and selection processes and have updated the related administrative guides. I've got a statement here from one of our group members, and she said it very well, so I want to read it to you exactly as she said it. She said, "When I think about my journey through our D&I efforts, I think about how within the last year, the wastewater treatment plant team has experienced about 30% turnover. Our team has been a part of various recruitments, which has allowed us to strengthen our team by bringing in new talents, skills, and experiences. From my Visions training and learning from shared experiences within the recruitment group, I look at our candidates in a whole new way. Instead of focusing on candidates that may have been doing the same job at another organization as the best person for the job, I have learned to look more fully at the diversity of our candidates and consider how their different knowledge and experiences could provide a different perspective or approach to what we do and the value that would bring to our team. With our key new hires, I'm seeing our team progressing and growing in new ways. They are learning from each other, collaborating in new ways, and offering creative solutions. As a result, the morale and productivity has increased." So building on that, our team, armed with the training that we had with Visions, is better positioned to fulfill the objectives that have been set before our group. This is a slide that you're probably familiar with, and it lists the objectives for each group, and I want to focus on a few of them. The recruitment group is to review and improve recruitment and selection processes. We're to ensure consistency and fairness and equity throughout OWASA. We're to discuss measurable progress indicators. Tonight, I don't have for you trend data or figures, but there is a scheduled meeting in September for your next update, and at that time, along with the annual report for the EEO, you will get some of that data. I can speak from personal experience. I was just involved with the recruitment that closed, and we had almost double the number of applicants that we had for recruitment 2 years ago for the same position. I realize that there may be other reasons that are impacting that increase, but I am confident that the improvements that we've made here at OWASA contributed to the increase in the number of applicants that we saw for that position. We're also to promote awareness of OWASA's D&I initiative. A couple of examples of ways that we're doing that is being done by the organization as a whole, but some things that our group has done is submit a communication to the organization as a whole that was included in the May newsletter. We spelled out for the organization some of the activities that our group has undertaken, where we are in that process and what the next steps would be. And we encouraged the employees to be a part of the goal of OWASA to have highly competent, diverse workforce and participate in the referral program and to complete the training to become an interview panel member. And lastly, to promote the awareness of opportunities for development and, I want to say one more thing, sorry. Nerves getting the best of me. One other way that we're promoting awareness is by individual conversations that we're having. I can speak for the finance team. We have regularly scheduled check-in meetings, and I take that opportunity at the beginning of the meeting to let the team members know anything that I know that's going on in OWASA that impacts them in their positions or should or does affect them as an employee. And one of those things is diversity inclusion. So at the beginning of this journey on this initiative, I began to keep them updated on things that were going on with our diversity and inclusion initiative. And I won't share the particulars, but we've had some very interesting, somewhat awkward, at times, conversations, but we are having the conversations. And without this initiative, that would not be happening. So now I'll move on to promote awareness for opportunities for development and growth at OWASA. One way we're doing that is through the How to OWASA program. For those of you not familiar, that's a 12-week program where employees spend 2 hours a week talking to the different departments here at OWASA, and they learn about and in some cases get on-site view of the roles and responsibilities in those departments. Since the D&I initiative, I take the opportunity at those sessions when introducing our team members to let them know that we have one team member that started as a meter reader here at OWASA, and with the right training and skill set, he was positioned, and when an opening came in the finance department, he was selected to become a finance member. We also have a team member that participated in the skill-based pay program. He developed new skills, he showed the competency of those skills, and he was promoted. And I want employees to be aware that those things happen here at OWASA. I want to leave you with one more story. I was involved with an interview panel. We had just laid out what our commitment is as OWASA on this D&I initiative and asked the candidates' views on diversity and inclusion. And after her response, her follow-up was to us. So what's the culture like at OWASA? How committed are you to this initiative? What progress are you seeing? It's kind of a trendy thing now. A lot of people say that they are committed to D&I, but when you look in their organizations, you don't see a difference. And I'm pleased to say that one of the panel members immediately responded and said that OWASA takes this initiative very seriously. It starts at the top. There's a lot of buy-in and support, and it trickles down our organization. He also stated that he felt very valued very supported and included here at OWASA, which he considers his OWASA family. And I think those statements from that employee speak as a validation that we are, as an organization, getting this message out, that the employees are hearing it and that they are embracing it. So I want to turn it over to Kelly B., and she's going to talk to you some about more specifics about improvements that have been made and what our next steps are. Thank you.
Good evening. And I know that Kelly is so glad that that's over. So we'll just leave it at that. Just been a little bit nervous, but she's good now. So good evening. My name is Kelly Belcher, and I'm the Human Resource Generalist as well as a member of the Diversity Recruitment Group. Unlike the members that were pictured with you, I don't necessarily, I don't direct or recommend any direct hires, but I do play a critical role when it comes to administering our recruitments here, as well as providing HR advice to those that do hire. So since the inception of the D&I plan, the diversity groups, along with staff, have made multiple enhancements to our recruitment selection process and procedures. These enhancements have increased our exposure to our OWASA employment opportunities, as well as formalized the processes for internal and our review and selection process. So just to name a few, as for outreach efforts, OWASA's recruitment approach is extremely critical to our success. We have an extensive recruitment efforts and strategies procedure that includes a long list of organizations that that receive our employment opportunities. Just for an example, there's over 80 organizations that are considered what we would call are part of our diversity outreach, and all 80 of those receive all of our employment ads. And that's they've either identified to us if they want to receive by mail, or they get an email, or it's an online job posting. But all of our ads go to those 80 organizations. We continue to grow our list by building on making networks with other organizations, just continue to get contact information from whoever wants to receive our ads. We add them to our list. In addition, to encourage employee referrals and maximize our exposure, we also email all OWASA employees every time there's a recruitment. So all employees know anytime we're recruiting for a position as well. All other recruitment strategies are kind of specific to the position. That could be an industry-specific organization that we post to, or other online sources, or maybe even newspaper advertisements. So a few examples of those would be, Mary Dar's in the room with us tonight, but we've been recruiting for a while now for an asset manager, which is an engineer position. So for all engineer positions, our strategy is to recruit anywhere we can to find an engineer, but we also include the Society for Women Engineers, the Society for Professional Black Engineers, the Society for Professional Hispanic Engineers. So we just really get that out there to as many people as we can. Another example for a strategy would be when we're recruiting for a position that's hard to fill. Obviously, water, wastewater, we do have those positions that require those specific certifications. You have to have certain certification, be an operator certified to be in a certain role. So what we've done in the past is, the most recent was the wastewater treatment plant operations supervisor recruitment, that we mailed over 1,000 job postings to all of those operators within the state of North Carolina that held the certifications that were required for that position. So we just really take a broad approach to our recruitment efforts. We participate in numerous career fairs each year, and sometimes we go into these fairs and we don't even have a job opening or a vacancy at the time, but we're still there. We're still promoting OWASA's great image. We're still handing out our cards that tell you how to get to our complete a job interest card on our website. We're still there. We might have to tell them, no, we don't have any job openings right now, but they see our face, they see our name, and they know how to get to us if they're interested. So obviously, to increase our diversity, we must increase the number of applications that we receive within each recruitment, and we're continuing to take great strides into to make that outreach approach expanded. So we formalized the internal review and selection process is by, one way we've done that is we've added a meeting at the beginning of each recruitment that's held between the hiring supervisor and the director of human resources and safety or her designee, which would usually be myself. And this is a meeting that we cover numerous amount of topics, and it's very, very thorough, very informative. We look at position job descriptions. We look at the position job announcements. We talk about census data. We talk about any guidelines referring to interview panel guidelines, to what qualifiers we using to rate these candidates to get to that best qualified person, what's required in a memorandum just to justify making someone an offer. It's a very thorough process that has to be approved by the executive director. So there's just a lot of work done on the front end of the recruitments. We've also enhanced the interview panel process, and this includes interview panel training prior to all interviews. These sessions have become vital to the process. It's an opportunity not only to hear those do's and don'ts about conducting an interview, what not to say, what you can say, but it turns into more of an open dialogue between the panel and the hiring supervisor to really get deep into the process, talk interview questions, talk about the timeline, and really just for them to communicate and make sure that they're all on the same page when it comes to what's needed for the position. And I can say to date, we've had over 60 employees that's been trained to be on an interview panel, and that many people are participating. And that's almost less than half the organization. So people are really getting involved with helping us recruit the best people we can. We've also updated all of our job postings that it indicates a commitment to our diversity and inclusion plan. We've added, like Kelly mentioned just a few minutes ago, we've added the diversity and inclusion question to all interviews. And it basically states our diversity and inclusion plan and goal, and then it flips the question around to the interviewee and asks, what do they see as the importance of having a diverse workforce, and how would they foster an inclusive work environment? So it kind of gets an understanding from the candidate and how receptive they are to that initiative. So it gives us a little bit of insight on that. And there are many other OWASA initiatives that's going on. We talk about the Youth Academy, you talk empowerment and the Career Explorers program, the internship opportunities that you heard from earlier. I mean, all of these are programs that are increasing our visibility in the community, and one day will have a positive impact on our recruitment efforts. And then speaking of that, we do have a success story. We have a gentleman that was just started to work last week, and he was hired as our new assistant lake warden. And this individual worked 2 summers a couple years ago through the Career Explorers program through Empowerment, and did a fabulous job, made his name well known. And when that position come open, he applied. And he worked hard to get that position. That was a very popular position. There was telephone interviews, there was in-person interviews, there was second interviews, and he rose to the top. So we are really proud to be able to tell that story, and I think we'll probably feature that in the newsletter. So I won't give names and pictures and stuff like that, but we're real excited about that. And without that program, he wouldn't have fell in love with working at Cane Creek, working weekends. I mean, this is every weekend from March to November, you're devoted to Friday, Saturday. So he wouldn't have had that, he wouldn't have known about that position if he hadn't went through that program. So we're super excited about that. So that was just a brief description of some changes that's been made since the D&I plan was implemented, and by far does it include everything. But when we talk just a few minutes about some specific things that the diversity recruitment group has been working on lately, we've been working on a few items from some of the recommendations from the recruitment and selection, as well as some recommendations from visions. This work primarily includes reviewing some of our administrative guides and other documents, and kind of working to update these documents and kind of make them a little bit more streamlined, with the approach that they're more objective and with consistency and transparency, while trying to eliminate minimize opportunity for biases is where we're headed with that. But so what we've really been working on, we had 5 administrative guides. So when you wanted to learn how to see what the process was for an interview panel, you had a guide. If you wanted to know what Ed required to make a job offer, we had a guide. So we're taking these 5 guides and making them one comprehensive guide to just make it more of an easier, streamlined approach. The updated documents will provide guidance on all aspects of our evaluation and selection, ensuring that it's fair, that it's objective, it's job related, and without bias. In saying that, the HR department has also been working with an expert that was recommended through Visions to review all of our written policies and procedures related to recruitment and selection. And this included that new guide I was just mentioning. But we were real pleased that, we've got a lot of positive feedback from that review. And this is someone completely from the outside. This individual did not have anything to do with our D&I plan and program. He was someone separate that we wasn't used to seeing with Vision. So he was blindly looking at our documents. And we got a lot of positive feedback. We did get a few minor suggestions, which we wanted. We wanted somebody to look at it and help us make it the best it could be. So now our work is just to finalize that. So we're working on that now. So to wrap this up, kind of a look ahead. In August, Visions will conduct sessions for all supervisors. This will include an introduction to all these recruitment enhancements on these procedural documents. It'll also include implicit bias training. And another piece to that they'll add is tips on how to talk openly about diversity. So that'll be for our supervisors. In addition to any of those 60 interview panel members that have been trained that are non-supervisors, they will be included in the training as well, but primarily for the implicit bias training session. So we'll get the members in there. Moving forward, the diversity recruitment group will obviously continue to promote our D&I initiative. We'll encourage new members to join our group. Continue to support the other diversity groups as we work through this list of recommendations that we're working through. And I had a few listed up there, but that is by far all of them. It's a pretty extensive list and we're working through them pretty heavily. We'll also play a role in assisting to develop a matrix to measure our successes. And to piggyback on what Kelly Satterfield said earlier, I too am confident that our work thus far will soon show that our applicant numbers are increasing because of our continued improvements to our outreach. So I'll end on a personal note that I'm extremely proud and humbled to see the work that all involved has made so far to make OWASA even better than it already is. I'm honored to work for an organization that not only cares about and cares about the importance of having a diverse workforce, but also truly cares about my experiences. So focusing on an inclusive work environment shows the commitment to have a work environment that values the individual. So thank you for your time and thank you for your continued support for OWASA employees.
Thank you, Kelly Belcher and Kelly Satterfield.
Yeah. So any questions?
Are there any members of the public who wish to comment? Board members? Yinka Iankoya.
I just had one quick question. So it might not even be a quick answer because I said quick question. The increase in applicants, is it just numbers or are we seeing a diverse group of applicants?
We haven't looked at it yet. So I guess back in 2017 was the first year that we included our applicant numbers in our EEO annual report. So we've got 2017 numbers, we've got 2018, and then we'll have 2019. So we will have at least 3 years to kind of compare that. So we should have more of that information in September when we have our annual EEO information, because we will have 3 years. It's kind of hard to go beyond 2017 because we didn't really track our applicant information, but now that we are, we should be able to kind of look at that, in a matrix.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Other comments, questions? Jody Eimers?
The other Kelly mentioned that.
Yeah, please get her back up here. Come
Yes.
Kelly Satterfield.
Yeah. You did a great job. Don't worry. Thanks. You mentioned a program where employees spend 2 hours a week in some other division or part of the organization, what percentage of the employees participate in that?
Each, it's an annual program. Each session, I think, has like a max of like 12 employees.
I see.
I don't know the number. We've been doing it now for, I think we were on our 9th year, just finished our 9th year. Yeah, and about 10 to 12 employees each year, but we've never had to turn anybody away. I haven't looked at it, but I would almost bet that most, I would say, I don't know, maybe 80% of OWASA has already kind of went through it at some point. Because when we first started it, we did it twice a year. So we did it more often, but don't quote me on the 80%, but that's the Kelly B number. But
that might also be one of the metrics you use for reporting on diversity inclusion growing. If there's a growing number of minority people participating in that program, that might be a valuable
we
statistic.
can look at that. We keep that information from year to year. Thank you.
And then also another thing, you might not have enough numbers for this, but if you could show that minorities are being promoted within OWASA, if that number is increasing, that would also be a valuable statistic.
Bruce Bowen?
I think it's great, this program, in particular, how the whole organization seems to be embracing it, and that's not very common. There's lots of organizations that talk about diversity and inclusion, but don't. You mentioned a matrix that you use to measure performance. I'd be curious to see a copy of that. Did I not understand? Some matrix form that you use?
We're still developing it.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
and that's what I was telling. Yeah, so we've got data. We did get some examples with that work from the work from Visions, some recommendations and some examples of some matrix that we possibly could use. We just haven't quite developed all of that just yet, but that would be our next step.
Okay. When you have that, I'd be curious to see it. Maybe other board members would also. Great, thanks.
Bob Morgan?
I just would like to thank the staff for what they have accomplished to date and for your real commitment to this program. Personally, it means a lot to me to see that commitment, and having those who are working in the departments coming back and telling us the stories really means a lot. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Other comments, questions? Thank you, Kelly. And Kelly, I want to say that I'm very impressed. This program had a lot of parts. I've been on this is my 3rd year. In the last 2 years, I've seen it become a culture, part of the OWASA culture, and I think it's very, very good. And I'm just very, very impressed. Please keep it up.
Thank you.
The next on the agenda is an update on the water main prioritization model. Mary Dar.
Good evening. I'm Mary Dar. I'm the Director of Engineering and Planning, and I want to introduce, it's so hard for me not to say Adam Haggerty. Adam Sharp, who is the Utility Planning Practice Lead and our project manager from HDR, the consulting firm that we're using for our water main prioritization update. Andy's giving me the look. Oh, yes. Thanks. So we're excited to provide this update tonight. Back in February, Vishnu Gangadaran, who's actually OWASA's project manager, but Vishnu is in Spain for the week, so I'm subbing for him tonight. He and Adam were here to talk about the scope of services for the project before we got it underway, to make sure that the board understood what the project was and some of the enhancements to our prioritization model that we're doing this round. On to my first slide. So I just want to provide a little bit of background. So I'm going to just do the first couple slides, and then I'm going to turn the hard work over to Adam to talk about what they've been doing on the consulting side. But just a little background again, we have about 380 miles of pipe in our distribution system throughout Chapel Hill and Carrboro. That pipe is of various sizes and materials and standards of installation, ages. we've had a prioritization model to help us decide which pipes need to be replaced and the rate of, or the level of investment for that replacement since 2003. We updated that model in 2010, and now that model is 9 years old, and it's just time. About every 10 years, we update most of our models, prioritization or hydraulic models. The model we had was functioning, but we knew that we could have, there are better tools to do this prioritization now using very specific information about OWASA's distribution system, about our break history, and Adam will talk more about that in his presentation. Over the last 10 years, we've replaced about 1.7 miles of pipe a year, starting fiscal year 2020, just last week. We have $9.1 million set aside to replace water mains in FY 2020. Again, that's about 1.7 miles. Obviously, the Barclay and Kensington project that you awarded on the consent agenda is a big portion of that. Over the 5-year CIP, we have about $37 million set aside to reinvest in our distribution system. Just a little bit about the goals. One of the things, it's time to get an updated model. There are better tools that we can have in our toolbox to help us with ranking the priority of our water mains, and then in identifying which those and the investment or the replacement rate for those pipes. This project's being done in 2 phases. You'll hear us talk about phase 1 and phase 2. Right now, we're just getting towards the end of phase 1, which is the prioritization model itself. Phase 2 gets into both capital and operating planning to help with the resilience of the system. So some risk planning for if a pipe breaks, some of these critical pipes, what operation protocols can we have in place to go out and isolate them quickly. So this is not just prioritization this go around with our model, but it also has some operating components to it. I just want to give a little bit about the process before I hand it over to Adam. We involved University, UNC, and UNC Healthcare early on in the process. We shared the scope with them to get their feedback, the goals and objectives. We also worked with them. Part of this project is identifying critical customers, and it was important for us to understand the criticality of the facilities on campus. We used a very collaborative process, and I think this, again, speaks to diversity and inclusion that we just got done. Kelly's did a great job presenting. We had over 40 staff from both distribution and collection, our water treatment plant, engineering, and administration have been involved in this process to date. One of the key things that we started with was data collection, and and Adam will probably mention this as well. OWASA has really good data. We have a great geographic information system, GIS. You'll hear us say that's our mapping system of the pipes in town. We have a hydraulic model. This is the first time we've really integrated the hydraulic model with our prioritization project. Our 2010 model didn't have that. And the importance of our work order management system. So when our distribution and collection folks are out working on water lines, that they're collecting robust data that we can then tie into this model. So that data collection is really important. And final step, and that's what we're going through right now, is the data analysis in phase 1. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adam to talk about what they've been working on.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you all for having me, allow me to come and do this update. Hopefully I give you enough detail so you can ask you some real hard questions. But keep it short enough that I don't lose anybody. So this chart kind of gives us a little bit of idea of the progress to date and a snapshot of where we're going with the phase 1 that Mary referenced. The front end all the way back to March, right after I was here last time talking with you on the project and the scope of the project. It was really important to capture a lot of the institutional knowledge. Randy Horton, who was retiring in March, we needed to capture a lot of that, 30 or 40 years worth of knowledge in his brain on the system, and as well as other staff for sure, but he was a key player in driving some of that front end knowledge transfer. As we step through that April through July, we've worked on what you'll hear me call the system deterioration analysis, is we really took a deep dive on the historical water main breaks that Mary referenced. Then we use that to drive developing a risk prioritization framework that will ultimately be used when we think out to phase 2 to prioritize and focus investments in capital and operating strategies in the future. So I'll go ahead and get into it. So kind of give you a little big picture of where we're headed with phase 1. What is going to be the outcome of this when we get there? And I'm going to step you through all this. But ultimately, in the end, the goal is to have a risk prioritization for all of the finished water distribution assets, pipe assets that OWASA owns and operates. A risk prioritization is important for a number of reasons. I mean, it really is at the core of things like asset management, risk management. The goal here is to focus our investments, for, minimize greatest return on investment, to minimize risk, maximize asset life cycle, and maintain level of service. So we're doing that from the asset level up. Every pipe stick in the ground, is represented in GIS, and building that from the asset up, identifying likelihood of a failure and consequence of a failure, and building that from the very bottom up to use this, likelihood and consequence, giving us a risk priority score. Now, you probably all are familiar that there are many ways to express and analyze risk. This is one of them. It's very common to the water utility sector, and it lets us build from that very finite level up, and then be able to spatially understand the distribution of risk across the entire service area and by each asset. Okay, I'm going to focus first on consequence, and then we'll get to likelihood. So the consequence component, as you heard Mary allude to, we are doing consequence has historically been, subjective judgment as far as what consequences are and will they actually be, encountered. We've taken that to a more quantitative basis in integrating OWASA's hydraulic model as part of this analysis. So that first part there you see with a customer service impact, all that information, and that's more your system-based impacts. If a water main fails, what is our system-based impacts? What kind of how many customers are going to be out of water, have low pressure? How many critical customers are going to be out of water? And then and the top one is, if that water main were to fail, how much water would be potentially lost from that system, having sort of a systematic impact on OWASA's distribution system. The bottom set there, as far as community disruption, those are very much focused on, that water main fails in that local vicinity. What is the effect of that failure? What is the transportation impacts? It's a much greater impact, if we have a main fail under a railroad than a neighborhood street. So building some of that logic in there as part of that, as well as there's several mains that are very close to buildings that has a higher consequence, as well as land use. That's where we start differentiating between the impact of a water main break in a business district or in the town center versus maybe a rural residential area. So that really kind of encapsulates a lot of that consequence component. And again, looking at the very asset level. Okay, I'm going to start here, and then I'm going to give you a much clearer picture. So we've done this for all of OWASA's assets in the distribution system across the entire service area, identifying the highest consequence to the lowest consequence assets. And on this map, obviously the red danger, or not danger, I shouldn't say danger. Red is your highest consequence, really draws your eyes to it, and really that's a lot reflective of your major transmission infrastructure that has system-wide implications and importance. Okay? If I go a little bit closer here, and I apologize, that black text on that red doesn't show up really well. Okay, the map on the side gives you a little bit closer snapshot of downtown Chapel Hill. You can see some of the university and some of the pipelines coloring. Red is the highest consequence of failure. Blue is a low consequence of failure. From the analysis right now, and I'll be honest, we are working through iteratively with staff to do the analysis, review the analysis, make sure a lot of what they see in the field or experience in the field is reflected as part of this analysis, and how we're creating the thresholds for what's high and what's low. But right now, it identifies about 31 miles roughly of high consequence of failure water mains. And then the blue and green puts you in about the 250 range or a lower consequence failure. It just kind of shows you how we're sort of breaking these pipe assets up into buckets so we can start creating some focus of where we need to identify capital strategies and management strategies for each of these. Okay. If I transition now to likelihood, I just put this one up here. I'm going to talk about each of these factors here in a second. But really where I want to start at is the piece that Mary brought up. So let me orient you. This is a chart because I think it's a fairly impressive chart. So this chart shows you the historic break rate for OWASA dating all the way back to 1985. Okay, so this is a culmination of a lot of different data back to the mid 80s. Okay, and the y-axis is showing you the break rate. So the standard metric for break rate is number of breaks per 100 miles. Okay, so you can see in the late 80s, OWASA was in the 40 to 50 range. Okay, 40 to 50 breaks per 100 miles. Okay, and over time, okay, that has come down to the 10 to 15 breaks per 100 miles. Okay, so first point is there was a lot of data. This is good data. It's a good history to build some statistical basis for these likelihood factors. Okay, the other part is what OWASA has done since 1985 has really helped drive down that break rate. Okay. So the green bars are the number of miles each year that have been replaced by OWASA since 1985. With the last decade being in the 1.7 miles per year. Okay, but you can see as that program ramped up into the early 2000s, that's really when you start seeing that break rate come down. And I would say probably since you've probably been in between 10 and 15. Maybe a little bit less breaks per 100 miles for since the early 2000s, and maintain that over that period of time. Okay, so a good history and a good story of where you're at, and now really this focus of this work is how do we focus these investments to help maintain or potentially improve on that type of level of service to the customers. Okay. So this is where I get into a little bit of detail on that deterioration analysis, that water main breaks, that 34 years of history on water main breaks. And I've kind of created four buckets here, of factors. And truly, we started out with 17 total factors that we analyzed. They all were in these four buckets. And we found 12 to be most statistically relevant to causes for the historical water main breaks. So construction quality is really about diameter, material type, and vintage. And when I say vintage of the pipe, that's really about manufacturing era. Because if you look back to the dates of the pipes, go back to the 40s and 50s, 20s. There's a process of manufacturing has improved and changed over time, and that has affected pipe quality significantly over time. We'll look at something that shows that and how that's impacted OWASA. The deterioration drivers, these are the things about the factors that will cause the decay of the pipe material. Groundwater, soil corrosivity, those types of things. Pipe stressors, those are the external factors that external and internal factors that stress the pipe. Okay. Shrink swell potential of soils stresses pipes. Internal pressure of a pipe stresses the pipe. Whether or not there's an air release valve or not, that's a stressor. And the last one is all about performance. And I'm going to talk through these two charts. It's essentially looking at the pipes and how they performed over history based on the break data, and what that tells us about the pattern of break and frequency of break and the likelihood of an additional break. Okay. Now, finally to the chart. So the chart, just to orient you, on the y-axis, you've got the percentages of pipes that have broken again, multiple breaks on the same pipe, versus the number of times, the number of breaks on the x-axis. So what this chart is telling us is this. So if we look at this first dot right here, so what this is saying is based on OWASA's history, if a pipe has experienced one break, there's a 38% chance on average that it will break again. Okay? So as we move out further on the curve, if it's broken 8 times, it's 75% likely that it will break again. Okay? Obviously, as you move out in this curve, you're getting more towards what your traditional end of life looks like for a pipe. You just break and break and break over and over again. Okay? I think the next one layered on top of this is really interesting and informative is now this one's looking at, we were looking at the likelihood of break again. This one's looking at the duration to the next break. Okay? So average duration on the y-axis, number of breaks again on the x-axis, excuse me. So this is telling us that if we've broken one time, based on OWASA's historical data again, on average, it's 6.5 years to the next break. Okay? Obviously, as we move out again, where there's more breaks, if we look at if it's broken 10, if a pipe is broken 10 times, okay, we're looking at about, it'll break it's on average, that pipe will break again in 2 years. Okay? Obviously, you can see as you go out and it breaks more often, the breaks get closer and closer together. The punchline here is, and this is fairly common to what we see in many other places, you know, as far as performance goes, the more a pipe breaks, the more likely it's going to break, and the more likely those breaks are just going to keep coming sooner and sooner and sooner. So it helps us understand how these pipes have been performing and how we can use this for predicting, or not, I don't want to say predicting, planning for the future. Okay. One other one, this is the part I was talking about before, and I think this is interesting as well and been really useful as far as the risk piece is. So this is a table of putting together the construction quality pieces. So it's looking at the material of the pipe, the vintage, again, the manufacturing era of the pipe material, and the diameter. So if you see CI, that's cast iron. You see AC, that's asbestos cement, and DI is ductile iron. So if you remember, I told you, you know, OWASA's been performing in the 10 to 15 breaks per 100 miles, and that's system-wide. So what we did here is we took all the breaks and broke them up into cohorts or groups based on these here to see what type of material was actually performing good and what was performing poorly. So we could use that to know if we've got these other materials out in the field, you know, how are they going to perform in the future? As you can see, and I'm sure you've experienced, and I know there's the replacement program related to galvanized pipelines, obviously 96 breaks per 100 miles, okay? Fairly significant, a low performing pipe material, and I know that OWASA is working to proactively address the galvanized pipe. I know a lot of those are services 2 inches and 2 inches in size. I'll give you another frame of reference. If I look at, so the water main that broke out in front of the water plant, okay, the cast iron thin wall 1947 or younger, 8 inch and larger, 20. So that pipe is performing 21 breaks per 100 miles. Okay, so it's also a low performing material type. And just to give you an example, around World War II and for cast iron pipe, that's when they changed the manufacturing method, where they advanced the manufacturing method, they could make a thinner wall pipe using that method for cast iron. We split the same thing out for asbestos cement. If you rewind to the 2017 break, that's the fourth one from the bottom, AC type 2, 1953 or younger. That pipe material is performing better than the cast iron and some of the smaller AC pipe, but still one of the lower performing. The best performing pipe, which is good, is your current standard of using ductile iron pipe. Okay. So this is the type of information we're using. That's just 3 pieces I showed you of the 17 we analyzed to drive, statistically drive some of that informed decision of what those likelihood factors need to be. Okay. So you can see I've come back to this risk prioritization framework slide. So this is the whole thing, the consequence factors, the likelihood factors. Break history is a significant driver of using actual data from OWASA to drive the likelihood. That will be data that OWASA will continue to collect over time, and that can be then fed through this process to continually update the risk prioritization for the portfolio assets that OWASA owns and operates. And you can see some of the other ones that were included. Okay. If we look at this, again, same thing, we built this from the assets up to understand, at the asset level, what the likelihood of failure is, as well as the spatial distribution of that risk, excuse me. And then we zoom in, again, same aspect here of downtown Chapel Hill, some of the university. The pie chart showing us, if I lump together the high likelihood and highest likelihood of failure, there's about 6 miles out there that are of the highest likelihood of failure that need to be, that when we get to phase 2, we're going to look at what are the capital strategies that could be in place to help manage some of that. Now, just because they're ranked high likelihood of failure doesn't have an implication that something's going to fail next year. There is no prediction here of when something's going to fail. It's just identifying what our priorities are and what we need to prioritize from a focus standpoint. Okay. So very quick preliminary thoughts from our side, echoing Mary's comments is, there was a lot of data available, both from the break data, the system data, the GIS data, the model. It allowed us to integrate a lot of good information and really sort of push this process to have really good quality and a solid foundation for the analysis that was done that I've shown you and the risk model development. The interaction and collaboration with staff, 40 staff, at the very first meeting, we sat down, small groups around the table, marked up maps and got the field staff's input. That's irreplaceable. You can't have a model and not validate it with something. And the best validation is what they see in the field as far as, is the AC pipe soft, are there pits, in the material. Yeah, I mean, doing those two things together really provides some validation for it. We're on schedule. We pushed hard to get to a May 29th to have this working draft so we could sit with staff and have something here today. We're still working through closing out phase 1, integrating their comments and building this risk model. And I think ultimately with the information that we have, well positioned for phase 2 to identify where we need to move next so that, OWASA has what you need so staff can make those really informed decisions, from a risk perspective. Two last slides here. Phase 1 closeout. The goal of this risk prioritization is also something that integrates directly with information management systems that OWASA owns and operates now. So it consumes new break data. It can be annually updated as part of an annual process by staff. The other piece we're moving towards is a renewal forecast. Mary talked some about the renewal investment. So this is really going to be a new tool that will be available to OWASA that allow you to look at, and this is just an example on the side here, but look at, based on forecast of future breaks, okay, what investment needs to happen, what replacement rate needs to occur, to maintain different levels of service. So it'll allow you all and staff to look at different scenarios of, if we want to improve our level of service, what does that mean from an investment standpoint? Does it mean we need to go to 20 million a year? Does it mean, what does that mean? So you have a relatively quick understanding of what the implication of those decisions are to change your level of service when it comes to water main breaks. And phase 2 is really going to take phase 1 and put a plan together, a strategy and plan for things, for your capital and operating strategies, for things like where do we get the best return for our investment if we decide to go do condition assessment in the distribution system, and where should we start? Pipe break response planning. Okay, we've got some highly critical pipes as we've experienced in the past. What are our response plans for that? And then also looking at different things, how do we manage break data so it's readily accessible by this risk model, and looking at different corrosion control options. But really, building off of phase 1, looking to engage some more external stakeholders as part of that process, some of that response planning. And really the goal is obviously to keep you all informed of where we're at and what's being done, but also, having some firm outputs from this at the end of 2019, fall in 2019, but also then kind of wrapping up and putting a bow on the whole thing early 2020. So with that, I'm done, and I'll take any questions that you got.
Well, thank you, Adam and Mary. Are there any members of the public who wish to comment? Members of the board, questions and answers? John?
This is a real simple one. You were showing that very interesting list of different types of pipe and the reliability of each type. It seemed that you lumped ductile iron and plastic together. Is that because they have the same reliability?
It's essentially based on the data they're performing very similar. Yeah. And truly, cast iron, asbestos cement has been in the ground a long time, so there's a lot more data about those. Ductile's been in the ground for long, plastic more ubiquitously, less data. We may learn in the next 20 years that plastic or anything, that it's subject to different stressors, but they perform the same right now based on the data.
Thank you.
And I was just going to add to that, they perform similarly, but in our distribution system, we have about 250 miles of ductile iron pipe. We only have about 20 of PVC. So we have a very small portion of the total that is actually PVC pipe.
Other comments, questions? Jody Honors?
You referred to the dynamic risk model. And I wondered, is that a canned software that you pulled off a shelf, or is it something you have done a group of analyses and have through some algorithm?
Obviously, the risk prioritization is an algorithm. It's not proprietary or anything like that. It basically puts all those factors together and calculates it out. It's really just a code that's coded into GIS using a specific type of script that OWASA GIS staff are familiar with, and that will be turned over as a toolbox that'll integrate right with the GIS system within OWASA. So there's nothing, it's not, I wouldn't say it's custom off the shelf application, but there's nothing proprietary about it. And when HDR is done with it's owned by OWASA to maintain and operate. There's nothing proprietary hidden with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when OWASA updates the hydraulic model in the coming years, someone on staff presumably could input that new information and update the dynamic risk.
But they could, but that might be part of the hydraulic piece might be part of that update to rerun that consequence of failure analysis as part of that, which OWASA typically contracts for. So that might be, at that point, it may be an update for that.
Okay.
Yeah, I would add, of all the factors, most of them we could update ourselves. That piece where they ran our hydraulic model, because we actually in the CIP do have a plan to update the hydraulic model in the next, if it's not this year, next year. But you very specifically ran a program to like break every piece of pipe. And that might be a little bit beyond what our GIS people can do, but most of the other factors, and that was one of the problems with our 2010 model. It was basically an access database. And as we've updated our GIS information over the years, it got broken from the GIS because it didn't live in the GIS. So that's why we're really excited about having this new model that it's all connected. We can add a pipe, we can break the pipe in two, and it's not going to break the model, and we don't have to go back to the consultant to recreate it for us.
Is that an Esri script?
That's right.
Bruce Ronberg?
I thought it was an excellent presentation, a great program. And so this is your effort on this particular program. What did you use before?
So we had an access-based model. A lot of the information, we certainly had some break information attached to the pipes in the model. A lot of the factors that were used, and it was a risk model, it had likelihood of failure consequence, but for instance, I would call it, we used textbook information, for instance, on AC pipe. There were kind of life curves, and X% of AC pipe is going to fail at 25% or 50 years, and there's a band. Most of it's going to be 60 to 80 years, and then the final 25%. And so we use kind of those textbook values, whereas now we're using OWASA's actual historic, hey, this is how long as these two different kinds of pipe last in OWASA's system. So this is very specific to our data.
And also on your replacement miles,
Mhm.
I'm assuming on your water lines, you do complete replacement. You never line water lines or that sort of thing. Is that correct?
Almost never.
All right.
We have one instance on campus on Ridge Road where we needed to do a project rather quickly, where we actually did a liner as a test run for us. We do line sewer pipes almost exclusively.
right.
That's a lot easier. It's more complicated with the water pipes, but yes, we typically do a complete pipe replacement.
Bruce Bowen?
So in the historical analysis, do we have any sense of the impact of the installation technique or quality that was done versus the materials versus the soil and all that sort of thing? Have we been able to tease out installation quality?
Not exclusively, because there's not, there's a limited history of installer, right? Who's the contractor? There's more records of current installers that use current standards and current techniques versus the history back to the 20s of who installed and how they installed it. Now, that may be implicit in some of the cohorts that are generated by age and era, vintage, but nothing explicit in regards to actual construction methods and quality or standards.
Any other comments, questions? Okay, thank you very much, Adam. This is a very important component of the reliability and resiliency program that the board has established as #1 priority for the year. It's extremely important. Well, #1 along with water quality, of course, you can't forget that. But I'm just real pleased with all the progress that you made. And it's an excellent report.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
And we did put our last bullet there that we do plan as the project wraps up and we'll have phase 1 and phase 2 done, that in early 2020, it's not currently on the board's calendar, but if the board wishes, we'd like to come back early in the year when we're wrapping it up and we have some of the results and that information.
I would like to see that.
Okay.
Personally.
Thank you.
Thank you. So moving on, recruitment and selection approach for the new executive director. When the board elected me chair, I was filled with all these thoughts about, some overwhelming thoughts about what we were going to do this year, what all we had to do this year, and what the priorities were, and it's just a considerable amount that the board does. And then Ed announced that he was going to retire at the end of my term. So that added a significant challenge to the board, to all of us. And it's having been a participant in these executive selection processes, I know that they can take sometimes a year or more, maybe. But we need to start thinking about this very, very quickly. So I put this added this to the agenda so we could at least have a discussion and maybe even make a step or two forward tonight. I appointed Bob Morgan as chair of the HR committee to succeed himself as chair of the HR committee, because he has a considerable amount of experience in this, and I've asked him to put together just some materials so that we can start the discussion. And I just want to say that we're not, in my mind, we're not really replacing Ed Kerwin, because you look at his 24 years of service and leadership that he's provided and all of his accomplishments, that's not what we're intending to do. But what we're intending to do is hire the third ever executive director that OWASA has had to lead us and the organization into the future. So Bob, you want to take a lead on
Yes,
this?
Thank you very much. And to start off with, my first step here was to contact Ed after he made his announcement, and he shared with me he had worked on a succession plan, and that was included in your agenda packet, and that was very detailed and thorough, and I thought would help the board to understand all the things that we need to be doing. I think a good target would be to have a contract negotiated with the finalists in April, so that then the applicant would have sufficient time to notify his or her current employer and make arrangements to move into the community. That would take place in the last 60 days. But let me use the calendar. And I made a mistake and touched the screen and hold on again. I'm sorry. I should know not to touch the screen because it takes it back to the beginning. Here we go. Thank you. What I'd like to suggest tonight is that the board make a decision, and we don't have to make it tonight, but it would just give us a head start. But we can either do this selection process and recruitment process in-house, or we can hire a consultant to do the recruiting and the assessment, and then the board will make the final decision. Whichever way we go, I'd like to suggest that if we stay in-house, then the timeline and the plan needs to be developed, and the HR committee could work with staff to do that. If we go with an outside consultant, we would need to go ahead and prepare a request for proposals for consultants and send that out. So by the time the board gets back, we can have a recommendation ready of 3 companies for the board to interview and select. So if we went out with the consultants, we would have to send out the proposals that go out 30, 45 days. And then you have to do the interviews for that. And then after the selection, the consultant would help you do the necessary steps. And one of the key things that the board will need to do is, as a group, sit down and decide the key characteristics and skills of the executive director that you want. And the importance of that is that becomes the center focus of and the announcements that go out, is that this is the type of person that we're looking for. And then as you use that same data to do the assessment of the applications, and then your final, after the interviews, make your final selection. It's a real key and important part of the process. Now, if we stay in-house, we'll have to develop the process to do that. And I've done that in jurisdictions, so I could help with that. But if you hired a consultant, the consultant would sit down with the board and develop that for you, and then they would develop the advertisement that goes out, and then typically the staff and the consultant would develop all those places that we want to send out notices in order to get enough responses. Now, I'm anticipating we won't have a whole lot of problem. I think this will be a position that will be very attractive to a lot of people. So I'm very hopeful that we won't have a problem where we send notices out, and you typically want to leave that out there 45, 60 days for people to have time to respond to applications, that we should have a good selection come into us. Now, where the steps going from that vary with consultants. They have different methods for screening candidates, and some screen and then give a list to the board, and then the board makes a selection. Other candidate firms would have an assessment process where they run, say, the 6 finalists through an assessment process that tests their skills. So that's the difference that you'll see when you interview consultants. But you have to look at the skills of the consultant, their experience in hiring in this area, hiring in this region, looking at how they're going to go about selecting the candidates for review, what the board's role is going to be. And that process is going to take, I would suggest we get the notices out before the holidays, get them out in October, November, and then the beginning of the assessment process could take place during the holidays, and then interviews could start, at the beginning of the year. But again, the whole timeline, one of the things that you'll get from the consultant is a timeline that they'll propose in order to be able to do it. So that'd be another thing that you look at. But you never know what you're going to run into. I've gone through some processes where they just work right through by the timeline, but I've had more processes where something comes up and slows the process down. You have to extend the deadline for applications because you didn't get enough applicants to look at, and hopefully we won't have that issue here. Working with an elected body, our schedules are complicated, and so getting us together to do certain steps identified by the consultants may take a little bit longer than we anticipate. So I've tried to define as much time so we got some swing time in order to get it done, because we certainly don't want to leave it go past the 1st of June. Otherwise, we're going to have to make some, other arrangements. But I'll be glad to answer any questions that the board might have about the process.
Okay, thank you, Bob. I need to ask if there are any members of the public who wish to comment. Okay, so we open it for board discussion. Members of the board? Yinka? Iankoya?
I have one. So Bob, just help me understand whether we're using a consultant or we're doing it in-house, we're still following the same process. It's just if we do it in-house, the board is more involved in which process is the board more involved in if we do it in-house as opposed to consultant?
Yeah, the biggest issue that you would take out of the calendar if you do it in-house, you wouldn't have the time to go out to spend to select a consultant. But I would say that the time requirements for the board would be greater if you do it in-house, because the board would want to be involved in deciding how the application's reviewed and how they're selected to get it down to, say, 12 to 16 people. And then interviews have to be done. The board has to decide how those interviews will be done. And then typically you'll bring, say, about half a dozen candidates, depending upon the quality of the applicants, in for face-to-face, type of interviews. So I don't think the staff would want to be, or we should want the staff to do those interview type of things. So we would, the board would have to do that. Or if you hire a consultant, they have the skill sets and the methodology to do some of that work. So the board doesn't have to be involved in it, but the board would be involved. Typically, what I've seen is that all the applicants get assessed by methodology, and then you have about 12 to 16 that rise to the top, and the board reviews those applications and decides to go ahead and maybe do telephone interviews with those, and then the results of those interviews come in, and then the board would decide which ones they want to have a face-to-face interview. the board's going to be involved heavily either way that we go. But the consultant would carry the most of the workload, plus the staff wouldn't have to be involved as much either. Now, one of the things that crossed my mind as we went through the diversity inclusion program is that the staffs really developed good methodologies for sending recruitments out. So we certainly want to involve them in that type of process. So we do the same thing for the director's position that we're doing for other positions. That's probably a long-winded answer. Sorry.
Bruce Baum.
A couple of things. One, I had some comments comments on the various documents that you have in there, the core competencies, responsibilities. Should I just send those to you? And other folks may as well.
Yeah,
this probably isn't the forum to go over those.
Yeah, that would be one of the first steps that the board would have to do, either with a consultant or without a consultant, is to sit down and have a discussion just on those.
On each of those things?
Yeah.
Okay.
That was just Ed's example and his input.
Got it.
It was intended to be an example, not the final product.
Got it. Okay. And then the second thing is, I would strongly suggest we use a consultant. I think it takes a fair bit of load off of us and the staff. One reason. A second is I think it's just cleaner that way. A third is there may be current employees who apply for the job, and it's just better hygiene, I think, to do it that way. So I would strongly suggest that.
Other comments? Bruce Runberg.
I'm curious, back when Ed was hired, what system did they use or what process?
The consultant, wasn't it?
Yes, the consultant was hired. And I just know from my end, actually, I had worked with that same consultant in another job I was considering on the West Coast. So that consultant was somewhat familiar with me, and I think that was a good thing on my behalf. But it was a process, I think, much as Bob described. I mean, this board, you all can be as involved or uninvolved as you want in that process, but I do think using a consultant is really smart for a lot of reasons. I think all the ones Bruce ticked off. But, I was interviewed over the phone. I had to answer some written questions. There were like 2 or 3 steps before I was invited for an in-person interview, and I think I was one of 5. And I was given tours of facilities. It was like a 2 or 3 day process. And I thought it was extremely well done. And of course, 25 years ago or 24 years ago that was. But yeah, I think you'd be wise to use a consultant. And and I appreciate what Bob just said about the same kind of thing we're doing for inclusion, that you consider that too, because I know it'll be important to you what this team wants and expects and will look for in the next executive director. And perhaps through the assessment process, there'll be an opportunity to include some staff members in some meaningful way in the process as well. And having that done by someone outside instead of inside would just make that much more comfortable for everyone. So.
Bruce Schoenberg.
The second question, and I don't think we need the answer to this right now, but I think the board members do need to know what the cost of a consultant is, just for information's sake.
Good point. Is there a budget consideration?
I did not attempt to get that.
Okay.
We've been collecting some requests for proposals that others have used. Had one from the county, the Chapel Hill, Greensboro. So we're collecting some information about the scope of work, the pool of consultants they considered, what the fees were for those services. So we certainly can, if the board decides to give the green light to the HR committee to proceed with developing a request for proposal or request for qualifications, we'll assist in gathering information and putting that together.
So what would the HR committee, you recommend the HR committee do this? I mean, that's what we have discussed. Is that what would the HR committee do between now and the August 22nd meeting?
Depending upon the comfort level of the board, is that the committee could, during the summer break, develop the proposals, and we could either just share that with the board and get feedback and then go ahead and send them out, or we could wait and do that at our first meeting when we get back in September, and you review that and those requests for proposals, and then we go ahead and send that out. And typically, again, 30, 45 days would be a good turnaround for consultant to respond to that.
So your timeline says to send those out in August. So in order to send them out, they'd have to be approved by the board at
Yes.
the August 22nd
Well,
meeting.
it depends on which route you go. If you're comfortable with HR committee just putting out a standard request for proposals, then we can go ahead and send that out, and then
And just copy the board. That'd be one option.
Yeah, copy the board, and then we go ahead and send those out, and that probably buys us a couple weeks by doing that.
You can, Ankoya?
So, and I'm actually comfortable with moving forward with hiring an outside consultant, just getting requests for proposals using this outline that we have.
Do we need a motion to do that? Or just, are there any objections?
Pushed it. Thought I had pushed it. I think it would be appropriate to have a motion to that effect.
Or perhaps the motion would be that the board authorizes the HR committee to move in the direction of hiring a consultant to recruit.
Proceed in the direction of developing a request for proposals that the committee would be authorized to go ahead and develop and send out. Is the way I heard your suggestion.
Right, but we would send a draft out to the
Right.
board for comment through email before we send it out. I mean, they're pretty much boilerplate type of proposals.
So do you want to make that motion, Bob?
I'll make that motion, yes.
Okay, Bob Morgan made the motion.
Second.
Is there a second? Inka Ankoya second. Any other comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Good.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Item number 10 is to review the board work schedule. Ed, you want to take lead on that, Ed Kerwin?
Yes, on agenda page 10.2, 10.3 is the agenda for your next scheduled meeting, August 22nd, Chapel Hill Town Hall, 7 p.m. And the main item on your regular agenda will be discussing a draft vision and guiding principles for forest management. There's also financial report, quarterly financial report due the board. So that will be the main item, which I think is great, because we'll have an evening to devote to that. It'll be televised at Town Hall. I think that's a good opportunity as well. As far as the 12-month schedule, you've heard some things that we'll be working to schedule a Human Resource Committee meeting to work on a request for qualifications, and with the understanding that the board has said that can be issued, but you'll see it, the full board will see a draft probably in an email from Bob Morgan in advance. So of course staff will get that scheduled with Bob and the committee. We appreciate your agreement to move forward with activities for forest management, and you've given us some specific things, such as look at UNC's forest management plan at Carolina North, look at possible alternatives to herbicides after controlled burns, and there were some other suggestions. So we'll consider all those as we move forward. You also made some suggestions on D&I program for future meetings and reporting, so thank you for that. So those were the key action items from tonight's meeting. Also, for the 12-month schedule, you heard we'll schedule some time early next year on the water main prioritization model. And it seems like there was something else. What am I forgetting that come up maybe as an add to the? Oh, yes, thank you. It is part of our budget this year to go to the bond market for new money, something we haven't done since 2006. So it's been a long time. We've had a number of refinancing to take advantage of lower interest rates. We've also taken advantage of low interest loans from the state of North Carolina, but it is this time that we need to go in around $20 million, something in that ballpark. So we need to get that populated on the 12-month schedule as well. Anything else?
Jody Amers?
It had come up the possibility of having an NERTS meeting. I think prior to the August 22nd, I don't think we need that. NERTS has discussed at least the guiding principles, and I think it is a valuable forum to have it in this public meeting that that the board can provide. As for the September 26th meeting and the process of prioritizing sites, let me say that I think NERTS should follow whatever the board wants to do, whether we have a NERTS prior to that or not. But if the board wants NERTS to have a meeting to discuss that topic prior to the September 26th meeting, I would want to speak with Ray DuBose, our chair, and Bob Epting, our counsel, and Ed, our director, about how much public participation we should allow and encourage in such a committee meeting. Because clearly there's a lot of public interest and we would get some animated public interest.
And in each case, it's been up to the committee chair, how much, if any, public comment to provide. And
I'm in favor of having a NERTS committee meeting before the September meeting.
Okay.
I think it's always been beneficial to discuss these complicated issues in a committee meeting prior to the board meeting and report back to the board. And then it gives just additional time for board members to attend as they wish to discuss the issues further. So I'm in favor of that. Do we need full board?
Well, the challenge to that is if there's going to be a committee meeting before the board meeting, now that backs up where our work needs to be done by the end of August. And we certainly can work towards that goal. But again, we're not in full control of all the partners, the time they'll need to get back to us, what we'll learn, just how difficult all this will be. So we certainly can work towards that. But if also could have the board's understanding, the committee may be seeing pieces and not a full-blown, fully reviewed proposal as well. So, yeah. Yes, we certainly could schedule and have a placeholder there, and then we can be in communications whether that seems doable or not. So, sure.
Okay, very good. One question about when the selection, what's the timeline for the selection of the banking firm, the new bank?
It's on the 12 months.
I'm
But you
looking for it,
haven't gotten
but
up tonight, Stephen, so come on on.
Well, my leg was going to sleep. We issued the RFP
It's
on the
October
2nd, I believe.
October 10th.
Okay, it's been out a week or so, and we're expecting responses by the first week in August. Be happy to email you guys kind of the timeline that we've worked out, but as Ed just mentioned, it's on tentatively on the October 10th meeting where we would be looking at a provider.
All right, very good. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, we stand adjourned.
Are you? Again, you get one every year, don't you?
Give my legs time to get.
Yeah, I hope so.
Well, I got two shaky legs right